Chapter 1. The time has come for you to seek new levels of reality. Your ego and the game are about to cease. Ego death. Buddhism. I slowly inched my way along the gravel road, checking the entrances of each property for the large number I was given. Bush properties always had numbers in the hundreds and thousands. This was the number of meters from the nearest sealed road or something. If I was organised, I could have used the van's odometer to measure the distance from the turnoff. The trees on my right side cleared, and I found myself out front of a purple gate with the right number on it. Beyond lay a huge, cleared expanse with a dam in the middle. It resembled a golf course with a landscaped lake. Wow, this place looks expensive. I suddenly had an uneasy thought that the owner isn't the owner but a caretaker for a property that belongs to one of those wealthy Pentecostal religions, rich on the tax-free cash that they gilt out of their followers. So, in short, cult vibes. Too late now, she's expecting me. I opened the purple gate and struggled a little with the wheel mechanism. Maybe it's not as flash as first impressions. A solo woman owner who can't keep up with all the maintenance required of a property this size? I'd experienced this with another solo woman landlord I'd had. It's a lot to do for one person, no matter your gender. I lived on Madeline's bush property for 2 years. Though she was a difficult person, she was handy and I admired her self-taught knowledge about all things bush property. And like Madeline's, this wasn't a livestock or crop property. Instead, it was a tree changer lifestyle block, very large block, that lay less than an hour's drive from Canberra, the capital of Australia. People had money in these little places, I assured myself. I steered my van along the well-kept gravel road that bordered the lake, full of anticipation. I was now more worried about the impression I'd make than the previous worries I'd had at the gate about the owner. At my last house-sitting assignment, a beautiful semi-off-grid property nestled at the foot of the Victorian ski fields. The hosting couple really sussed me out. It didn't help that they rang Madeline for a reference and she decided to be honest in her autistic way. It was true I didn't do all the jobs for free for Madeline because I paid rent. And if I started on those free jobs, it would be giving her an inch and then she'd take a mile. The couple maintained fruitful orchards and veggie gardens which I tended to each day and fed myself from. They were loving and parental after the initial suss out. I get it, it's weird to let a complete stranger into your home. I felt lucky that they were my first introduction to house sitting. I'd spoken to the owner, Billy, while I was at this Vic property. First a phone call and then a video call. She was friendly and companionable on both these calls. Billy explained who she was, her background, and that the separate studio I'd stay in was full of stuff that needed to be cleared. She was more concerned with me accepting her than the reverse. I found this refreshing. Another coastal house-sitting gig that I'd visited was more like a job interview with the uptight, extreme dog-loving couple owners. I'd passed the interview and was heading there after this sit, but it wasn't relaxing. The house on the property was smaller and not as mansionish as I expected. The grounds were a bit palatial and fitting of an old sheep grazier's property from days gone by. It was originally called Amsterdam, something to do with the flowers, before it was divided into non-farming acreage, according to Billy on the phone. 3 large German shepherds patrolled the gate and barked fiercely at me. Uh-oh, this wasn't good. Billy appeared dressed in corporate-style office clothes. She was more attractive than she'd appeared online. One of her parents is Pacific Islander, I thought to myself. That I didn't expect. This relaxed me more, for I love the culture. I was still nervous about the hounds, though. Billy held open the large vehicle-width gate and the dogs crowded me. The larger, older ones, Pedro and King, merely sniffed me. The younger, smaller shepherd growled at me and Billy growled at her. On the 100 or more metre walk to the studio, Emmy mouthed my hand in a puppy-like manner that she should have grown out of by now. Not trained, I thought to myself. She made me nervous. I know bugger all about dogs apart from the fact that they liked and trusted me, more so because I was gentle and submissive, like a lesser member of the pack. My dog vibe got me appointments. It wasn't working on Emmy though. I was as uneasy as her. And so was Billy. Not about me, or maybe about me, but not for the reasons that the other house sitters were. The studio where I was going to stay for a month, while she went back and forth to Canberra for work and Sydney to look after her father, who was going through cancer treatment, was as crowded as her life. She apologetically said that all the cartons and excess furniture would go. The stuff belonged to her ex-girlfriend who was moving out. I momentarily worried that this wasn't completely true, that she was a hoarder and I'd have to live around the piles. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. The studio itself was fantastic. Dark eggplant and mustard feature walls with open plan kitchen and living room and a steel spiral staircase that led up to a roomy bedroom loft that you didn't have to bend your neck in. It was so comfortable. I showed enthusiasm. Billy continued to be uptight and formal. She seemed to be trying to put her best foot forward while simultaneously worrying that she was failing at it. I could understand her concern. We walked through the gardens that led to the main house. There was a disused gravel tennis court that was being subsumed by moss. Square, waist-high hedges held unpruned rose bushes in their centre. Large, ceiling-height hedges bordered this whole garden. It sounds picturesque, but the gardens were neglected. This made me suspicious that she had lost control of her life a little. This would mean that I would have a lot of slack to pick up. Her information about the property was punctuated with rousing on Emmy, who wouldn't leave me alone. Billy had previously explained to me that she had a departmental job in Canberra, though she worked from home a lot. The animal duties, 3 dogs, 2 cats, and a pen full of chooks, all of which were rescued, would normally have been handled by her or her ex-girlfriend. The trips to Sydney for a week at a time and the departure of the ex meant that the house would be unattended every second week or so throughout the next month. The ex was still there and I met her in the kitchen, tall and androgynous looking, with an NFL footy player mullet. She barely said 2 words. She wasn't unfriendly. I got the vibe that she didn't feel like she had a place to say much. I immediately realised that Billy was probably bossy despite her previous friendliness to me over the phone. Uh-oh, what was I stepping into here? When I left, I gave myself an out by saying I'd think about it and get back to her. I was doing a fortnight with the coastal couple next. This assignment would fit in perfectly as it was for a whole month. More, if I liked, Billy said. I gathered the ex must have kept the place going while Billy worked, so she was eager to get me to agree to it. We said our goodbyes and Billy said she was going into Canberra for a job interview, hence the outfit. I thought she already had a good job, but figured these departmental types are always moving sideways if they can't move up. I knew the assignment was mine if I wanted it. This wasn't an interview of me, it was a disclosure of all the challenges of the place. I felt so uneasy about that place as I headed up through the inland from Sheepton, avoiding the main highway to Sydney. I was headed to the coastal couple who lived in a small town called Umpinpin north of Beachtown. I would camp somewhere along the way. My van wasn't really a camper van or an RV. It was a commercial van that fit into a 5-metre car space and was filled with all my worldly possessions, including my motorcycle. I slept on the floor on a thin mattress wedged between the bike and the wheel arch. There were no built-ins and my kitchen had to be set up outside. I stopped the van in a little rest area with no picnic tables by a stream on a deserted but peaceful country road. I stepped around to the back of the van and flipped a 50-cent coin in the air. It fell on the soft grass. Heads up for yes. I know that's a reckless way to make decisions, but I'd been relying on it for a long time. If I really didn't want to do it, I wouldn't flip a coin. I only chose that method in case I was missing out on an opportunity that I was too nervous to take on. I'm a very independent person, not involving friends in my decision-making process. I wish I could, of course, but my friends were all in relationships and stuck in their lives. I felt guilty that I had all this freedom. No husband, no children, no responsibilities. Making decisions about which adventure I chose next was kind of unfair to burden my friends with. They would normally urge me to do it anyway, sometimes living vicariously through me. Later that night, at a free camp somewhere along the way, I would text Billy and say I was interested, apologising for my reticence before and explaining it away as tiredness from the road trip from Vic. Billy responded with, "Bless, the puppies can be a bit full on." So at least she knew this. I wouldn't have to be in control of the dogs the way she was. I'd make it work. I usually made situations work with whatever charms I had at my disposal. I dawdled my way into Umpunpun the next day. I didn't need to buy supplies like I had in Victoria, where I lived a fair bit out of the nearest town. The woman had said I can eat whatever food I could find in the house. There was a fridge and cupboards full of food. I gathered that some hosts did this as a sort of payment. Fine by me, I ate anything when it was free. I wasn't looking forward to going to Umpunpun. The assignment was fine, the house was cosy, but they had insisted that I spend a night with them, learning the ropes. The Victorian couple had insisted on this too. It seems like hospitality, but is actually very awkward. I have to be on my best behaviour for the boomers. Don't swear, don't mention my predilection for THC and CBD oil, don't mention that I smoke cigarettes. Do mention that I don't drink alcohol, which gives the impression of responsibility, but don't mention that I was an alcoholic for decades. Theodore and Barbara. He was an ex-New York lawyer and she was an ex-Melbourneite who was working in NY as an art therapist where they met. Barbara had an art studio in the backyard and her artworks were scattered through the house. I complimented them even though I felt they lacked something. They had a son who studied and lived in the States and who they were meeting in Japan, hence the need for a dog sitter. They were Jewish, their dogs were Labradors, a quiet old black male and a boisterous young blonde who got jealous of attention shown to the black one. Theodore was autistically obsessed with these dogs. Theodore was autistic about a lot of things, I suspected. I would have to take good care of these puppies. They weren't outside farm dogs like the other two hosts. I would have to sleep with them in my bed. When I first stopped in with them for the initial interview on my way down to the Victoria gig, Theodore set a type of test for me. He was out on a walk with the dogs when I arrived, so I made awkward small talk with Barbara. He came back and the dogs both came bounding into the house. Chelsea, the blonde one, would normally growl at a newcomer. She didn't. I passed the test. I got honours when she sat at my feet. They both decided that she had chosen me. These dogs were like their children and they were new at having a total stranger living in their home. Barbara even voiced this. It's not nice to say, but I'll say it. They fit the neurotic Jew stereotype. They really belonged in Sydney and had moved to Umpunpun for a sea change. Barbara talked about the woman next door who she suspected was a drug dealer. She spoke through the lens of a therapist, though I could tell they weren't used to living near bogans. And I presented as a little bit of a bogan. I'm 52 years old, though I'm told I don't look my age. I'm 5 feet and a bit, medium athletic build, with a bit of menopausal pudge forming. Long brown hair that's sun-bleached and usually out of control, and shoulder tattoos. I dress for comfort, hoodies, jeans, boots and no makeup. I ride a 500cc Jap-copied cruiser. I've been a truck driver, my last job and a long list of jobs I've had ranging from professional to manual. And I said this on my house-sitting profile. Wanting to impress Barbara, I told her I'd gone to art college after high school. I became an unsuccessful artist for a bit, but I really went to art college to take drugs and hang out with the alternative crowd. In hindsight, I was more into music and probably should have pursued that instead of just being a girlfriend to boys in bands. Anyway, no regrets. Barbara asked if I still practiced. I tried to impress her further, saying, I don't know, I prefer to be a patron of the arts. I've been trying a kind of Buddhist ego death. No ambition, just being. It was wanky, but I believed it. Barbara said, so how's that working out for you? Sarcastically. I took this as a slight against my chosen lifestyle of living and travelling in my van. I can't remember my reply. She said she left me a lump of clay in the studio that I could sculpt with. Childishly, I was determined not to touch that clay to prove my resolve. I don't know why. It would have been here nor there with Barbara. There came another test for me this time, it seemed. A little family of two men in their 40s and two toddlers came to the door. They were gay, and I tried to hold back my gushing at meeting an LGBTQ family, as that was too patronizing and obvious. Be cool. I was the B in the alphabet tribe at times in my life. I was initially relieved at this progressive turn of events, until I wasn't. Barbara unsuccessfully feigned complete surprise at them showing up like this. Something told me that neither party were into spontaneous visits. They were here to suss me out. One was a very attractive Asian male. He seemed to do all the child attending. Amongst this, he had a chance to appear very standoffish and unfriendly to me. The other, a tall blonde Aryan with a North European accent, countered this unfriendliness by attempting to display a formal friendliness towards me. It was odd. I figured the Asian was the trad wife, and it was later explained to me that the Aryan commuted and worked in Sydney in a very successful tech startup or something. I guess he could, since he had a house husband. They didn't show any interest in me or my story, thus not being very good at their job. We all sat around concentrating on the dogs and the children. Theodore and Barbara said if I needed help, their number would be on the long list of emergency numbers in a far too detailed folder of info they had typed up. I really hoped I wouldn't have to ring them. They left and Theodore and I took the dogs for their evening walk. There was a set route to the outskirts of the house, along a beautiful river inlet whose horizon was too wide to see land. It was a lovely place. We cut through someone's leafy backyard and Theodore told me this would be okay. I decided I might not do this on my own in case I had to meet more of their friends. We talked about US politics, Trump, the abortion ban, and the sorry state of things. We were on the same page politically, and I was glad that I followed US politics in a car crash, curiosity kind of way. Theodore was a liberal, but I bet he would have appreciated the Trump tax cuts if he still lived there. Middle-class boomers were always about their asset value first. I was in the same boat as Theodore. People never picked me for a property-owning landlord. I didn't earn enough money to own property. It was from my farming family. But I'm not your average rich kid. I'd worked the cane farm in Caneville and the cattle property in Coaltown, along with my two brothers. But I got cut out of the business while they both received a property. Fair enough, they had to work them and pay off my parents, but they would have hardly had to forfeit the properties if they defaulted on payments. And if I didn't fight and lose the connection with my family for a time there, I wouldn't have gotten a bean. I thought of the money, not as a gift, but as compensation for the treatment I'd endured by them. No one else in the wider family believed I was treated differently, so there was that also. I took the slings and arrows from my mother and older brother to the heart, and with no support. That will fuck you up. It certainly did to me. I finally gave up my years of alcoholism when I scored money from them and tried to make a go of it. In both places where I bought, I loved my little apartments and made them happy homes. I started doing commercial delivery jobs with my van in Melbourne and eventually went back to it in Beachtown after a short stint teaching in prisons and hating it. I was successful with my van business for a while, until I wasn't. In the warehouse where I packed my van each morning at 5 a.m, the other workers were unfriendly to me from the get-go. I ignored it as they were losers. Things happened and I decided to quit. I'd been there for nearly 2 years, so I was pretty staunch, but fucking exhausted. I was at the point where I was laughing at them, which made them more furious. Hence the bullying got worse. The company begged me to stay, saying I was a good worker. It really hurt to have to leave, but I knew the company knew about the bullying, and I wasn't confident they'd back me. If anything, they'd make it worse. So I packed up my apartment, rented it out, and went on the road with my rental incomes tiding me over. I nearly made it round the lap of Australia, doing the occasional motorcycle show and rally with my motorcycle accessories stall. I mostly had a good time on the road, but when I found myself trapped in WA, with the northernmost road into the Northern Territory washed out in a flood, I drove the long way back to my parents' home in Caneville, North Queensland. It was hell having to be back with my family, but I got a job driving trucks during the sugarcane harvest season in my hometown, Caneville. Getting my HR license is the one thing I'm most proud of. I'm the most tertiary qualified person in my whole family, with a grad dip in education added on to the arts bachelor. But I wish I discovered truck driving when I was at uni age. I worked the season for the best boss I've ever had and healed from the warehouse losers. I made a tidy packet and put it away to earn a dividend on top of my cash savings. That and the rental income meant I was in a pretty high tax bracket, so I decided not to work another harvest season. I went on the road and discovered house sitting through a fast book group made up of solo women travelers. I loved that group, they were invaluable, and house sitting provided me with free rent when I was sick of traveling and living in my van. So here I was, doing my second house sitting gig. Like I said, I was in the same boat as Theodore. I mentioned to them both that I had an apartment at Beachtown that I lived off the rent from. I never mentioned the other apartment in case I appeared wealthier than them, if only on paper. It paid to seem a little humble, so they didn't question my povo lifestyle. When I was around new friends, I rarely mentioned my landlord status. I told the house-sitting crowd so they wouldn't think I was on the dole and would nick some of their shit. It was a fine line I walked, keeping my affairs private. Back at the house, Barbara had made us dinner. Again, I gushed compliments about the stuffed eggplant. I think she'd assumed I was veggie. I didn't have to falsely compliment this time. It was good food, and she'd made enough for leftovers for me. Nice. The next morning was another dog walk lesson down on the beach. It was breathtaking down there, and I couldn't believe I'd lived so near this paradise during my time in Beachtown. There were the usual middle-class, sea-changey type people down on the beach who were walking their dogs also. Theodore introduced me to them and I avoided questions. Luckily, these types of meetings are all about talking about their dogs. A young, beautiful woman talked about her high-powered career in a humble way. She really deferred to Theodore like she was in awe of him. I couldn't believe it. He wasn't that much, and she was far more. Another old, scruffy boomer was there. He was probably rolling in it, but enjoyed looking like a beachcomber. These weren't my people, I decided, and hoped I wouldn't have to small talk with them each morning. A friend arrived to take them to the train that would take them to the airport. Barbara was typically neurotic and anxious. This isn't Jewish typecasting, it's more a female boomer thing. My own mother behaves the same way before having to leave her safe haven and go forth into the great unknown. That's what middle-class comfort does to you. I wished I was going to Japan. They told me to send photos and do video calls with the dogs. They were their main priority and they were still nervous at leaving me with them. I assured them as best I could. I was really looking forward to relaxing in their lovely 3-bedroom bungalow with a beautifully decorated living room full of natural light from a skylight. I had a few challenges already. The living room wall of windows was leaking and I had to rotate some beach towels to keep it dry. Oh, and last night I'd noticed a puddle of dog urine when Barbara was showing me the towel thing. I told her and she immediately went into denial that Chelsea, the blonde lab, does this on the reg. So she wasn't admitting everything, and it wasn't nice to have to deal with the smell of the rug. Oh well, that's what you get with spoiled indoor dogs. They'd given me the job of setting up a new smart TV for them that arrived in a truck before they left. I set about doing that immediately since I do spend a shit ton of time watching streaming series. They had a few platforms, they said. Joy. I had to mount it on a wall. They'd assumed I'd be handy with that kind of thing, and luckily I was. The TV was safely in place in a jiffy. I had to download an app using my phone to set the TV up. I contacted them to get their email ID and put in a password, telling them I'd delete it off my phone as soon as possible. Theodore, the designated techie, had no qualms about this. I had their Wi-Fi password, so I tuned in the TV and I was away. I tuned into their Wi-Fi on my phone and tablet. I paid for heaps of data on my phone so I could watch shows in my van. It was good to use someone else's unlimited data though. Why not? The days passed with each containing routine that centered around the dogs. Chelsea would sleep with me every night in Barbara's bed. They had a spare room that I slept in the first night, but the bed was very high and Chelsea couldn't climb up on it. That's how important the dogs were to them. Important enough to let me sleep in their own beds. Chelsea would scratch me awake and I had to hold a hand on her chest to fight myself into an upright position so I could get out of bed. It was full on every morning. Bob, the quiet black lab, slept out in the lounge room. I could see he resented Chelsea's boisterous attention grabbing. She wasn't well trained. Each morning the dogs were ravenous. I had to cook up rice and vegetables for them. Luckily they didn't require them fresh every morning, so I could cook up batches in advance. If they had have insisted I'd do that every morning, let's be real, I wouldn't. Besides the 2 walks a day, I also needed to clean up their poo in the backyard. This doesn't sound too bad, but it was a real chore. I had to get to it before they ate it. And I wanted to get to it so I didn't have Chelsea's shit-eating grin, literally, up in my face, licking me every morning. Dogs are gross, really. Poor things, they had no choice in their lives. Well cared for, but without options. This is why I didn't have dogs, despite people's suggestions I have one for security. Making a dog do the anxious work of protecting me in different destinations every night was kind of cruel, I figured. Also, I wouldn't get these gigs with neurotic dogs if I had my own. Despite living in the lap of luxury, I was feeling depressed, hopeless, and of no use to society some days. Maybe Barbara was right. So much for my ego death. I like being anonymous, humble, all the things I understood about Buddhism in my limited understanding. I'd never read anything, studied anything, I didn't meditate, so I had no clue how to achieve ego death. I think it was really rebellion against my highly ambitious and accomplished family. My hours and hours of pondering about that always ended with me reminding myself that despite this, they weren't happy people. I hated that I thought about my family so much. It probably meant that I was still grieving my relationship with them. I did want them to be happy and for us to get along. And I was trying to be an Ireland. We do need people, conversation. When I lived with my parents that time, I was heavily reliant on a close long-term friend, Rachel, who lived in Sydney with her partner and daughter. She wasn't big on contacting, but she'd ring once a week and we'd air our respective grievances with life. She was the first one I rang when I started reading books about narcissistic parents and the damage they do to family. I cried my heart out to her. The family structure of a narc mother, enabling father, golden child, my older brother, scapegoat, me, and lost child, my younger brother, was so accurate that it was scary. I felt relieved that there was an explanation for my unhappy childhood. I also felt ripped off that I'd been subjected to this emotional abuse. And lastly, I felt fear about my mother. She wasn't to be messed with, and I'd messed with her a fair bit. I am, and probably always had been, a source of jealousy to her, and therefore a threat. Therefore, I'd had to be put in place, lower than everyone in the family. It was a shock to see how it had played out in a literal textbook manner. But I avoided ringing Rachel. It was a weird feeling. I felt that my problems wouldn't be welcomed by her, particularly since she'd been having a few of her own. She told me about how she psyched out on her partner one night while they were drinking. She put it down to past sexual abuse trauma and the fact she was dealing with a pretty unsavory character in her job. My theory was that she was feeling unsupported by her partner, hence the attack. A friend of theirs, a woman, had had a go at Rachel on a recent visit to her place, criticising Rachel for not having the same taste in music that she and Rachel's partner had. I had a nagging suspicion that the friend was having an affair with Rachel's partner. It was a very hot take, and I had no proof besides the friend carrying on with what I suspected was side-piece behaviour. She was exhibiting the frustration that women feel when their partnered lover is head-fucking them. Rachel's partner wouldn't leave her because their child was still under 16 and would invoke child support if he left. I had no evidence, just a hunch, and the nature of our friendship was such that I never criticised Rachel's partner, never suggested that maybe her mental health problems were as a result of being taken for granted by him. Or worse, I even got to the point of ignoring Rachel's calls. I knew this would hurt her, but I did it anyway. One morning I went on the solo women's camping group and shared a post about my woes. I described how I was feeling lonely while house sitting and couldn't share this with my partnered friends, as they all had their own life problems. I was free and traveling with no responsibilities. I was living the life they wished they could. There'd be no room for my depression at not making it successful. The feedback I got was so supportive and heartwarming. Women suggested that I join a local group to feel more like I was a part of whatever community I was in. Some also suggested that house sitting is lonely because you're tied to one place, living in someone else's life that's not your own. One woman lived nearby and said she'd come visit me in Umpinpin. I accepted her kind offer. The following day I sat in a park that fronted the river mouth and was filled with houseboats. I pondered what it would be like to buy and live in one. I made a mental note to look that up online when I went back to the house. Living in someone else's home sometimes made me yearn for my own. Janine pulled up and walked towards me, a short woman with long white hair as she'd described. We greeted and she presented me with a scarf she'd knitted out of wool she'd coloured with natural dyes. I was so touched and a little guilty that I sounded so miserable in the post. We went and got coffee, then she offered to drive us around the area. She was equally mesmerised as I had been on my first visit, and also couldn't believe she'd never visited here, despite living close. We drove out to the national park that lay north of Umpinpin. Garag is a beautiful area that contains picturesque campsites bordering the expansive river mouth. Janine scoped out the campsites for some easy ones to back her caravan into. She lived in a retirement village in a little town near Glenland, directly west of Umpinpin. She complained about the other residents dobbing her in for parking a caravan on the street. The village didn't sound friendly, particularly after Janine shared that she'd joined the men's shed, craft for males, in the village. A woman said to me, if I'd have known there was going to be a woman there, I wouldn't have let my husband join. We laughed at this. Janine was a widow, but she said she was no threat to any of the couples in that place. She liked to get away from them on solo caravan trips and was going to come here in the future. I really liked her style and was so glad I could introduce her to new campgrounds. We walked up the sand dunes to the endless, gorgeous Long Beach. There was nothing save for a couple of vehicles way up the other end. We even saw a dingo. Magical. Janine talked a lot about her life. She'd had a terrible first husband who cheated on her. The next one died. I got the feeling that she was sharing her hardships to let me know I wasn't the only one. She said she had an FWB, a friend she'd grown up with who she was going to stay with on her upcoming solo caravan trip. He lived up near Weedtown, where she was originally from. I liked her style even more. I didn't have to censor myself around this boomer. She was a real one. Janine dropped me back home and I was a lot more cheerful about going back to my own company. I felt like I'd stepped out of my comfort zone and achieved something. I answered a few more supportive comments on the Facebook group. A few women urged me to drop in on them when I was in their area, anytime. I got the feeling that a lot of us are lonely and looking for new friends who are in the same boat. I think one of the women, a biker, was trying to pick me up. I wondered if there were a lot of gay women on the site. It was awkward. I didn't want to say straight out that I was straight, because I'm not. But I haven't been with a woman for a very long time. I think I'm scared of them. I noticed that Billy had given me the once-over, focusing on my mouth or other features, plus long-held eye contact. That really would be the definition of screwing the crew. I wanted accommodation more than I wanted experimentation. Plus, she kind of made me nervous. That ex that I met had apparently only lived there for 6 months. Billy must be a handful, I decided. The ennui crept back into my state of mind over the next few days. I don't know why, but it was awful. I was doing everything I was supposed to, house-sitting wise, taking pics and videos of the dogs to show to Theodore and make him happy. I made sure I did this because earlier in my stay I hadn't heard their initial phone call. It set the neurotics off, and when I finally got near my phone there were at least 5 missed calls. Who does that? Theodore had a boyish obsession with his dogs. His bedroom was filled with Labrador figurines, like a little boy with his first puppy. And Barbara was a bit too neurotic for a therapist. Maybe I was unhappy because I was in an unhappy house. One of their friends, a woman their age, rang to see how I was going. She suggested we catch up for a coffee. She sounded pleasant enough, but I just couldn't take any more scrutiny. Not with the way I was feeling. It was a depression. I know this because one day I just decided to go and buy a bottle of gin. I'd been sober for 8 years with wagon falls that I could count on one hand over that period. I couldn't convince myself out of it. I sat in the backyard and drank it on ice, no mixer. I didn't even do anything useful with my relaxed state of mind, like write. I hadn't written for ages and I knew I had to get back into it. Instead, I listened to music, danced a little, smoked a shit ton of durries. What was my problem? The next morning was as expected. I drank half the bottle of gin, but I threw up about 2 litres over the course of the day. This was what happened to me now. Violently allergic to the stuff, but still desiring the serotonin it released. I had to lock myself in the spare room because when I shut the door to Barbara's room, Chelsea scraped the paint off the door frame with her claws. The dogs whined and complained about me shutting myself away from them. This neediness was enough to cause depression also. I know everyone loves people dogs, but I saw through this. Chelsea and Bob were eternally hungry, bored, and in the case of Chelsea, a bit special needs. It was like being an unappreciated carer. I call myself a house sitter and I've got this controversial opinion on dogs. And the urine puddles in the living room kept coming. On a couple of mornings there were actual shits. Probably revenge for shutting them out. Petty hounds. I blame Chelsea. Bob was too sensible and chill to do this. I wish he'd eaten them before I had to clean them up. I was angry that Theodore and Barbara hadn't mentioned that Chelsea wasn't fully house-trained. These weirdos were so precious about whether I was going to be a good sitter. Meanwhile, they were duplicitous hosts. I took the rugs out to the concrete outside the art studio. I was sick of the smell and figured if this indoor shitting thing was going to continue, better that it's on floorboards. There was a rainstorm and I still had to battle the elements and walk the dogs on the beach, which increased my misery. The weather was cold every day and I lit a fire most nights. Chelsea would hog the lounge chair in front of the fire. Bully for her. On the day before they came back, I decided to sculpt the lump of clay. It was to prove a point to Barbara, weirdly. I wanted to show her that I was artistic even if I never practiced. That is something that's in you naturally, like a sense of humour, a relaxed attitude to life, flexibility. I sculpted a woman on a motorcycle with cut-out discs for wheels, a triangle for the bike's body, and long hair that draped over the back of the wheel like a mudguard and held the sculpted body upright as a counterweight. I also made a little desert garden with a cactus next to the rider to show that she was riding no helmet through the desert. I loved it. I left it there for Barbara. I had no need for delicate, purposeless decorations in my van. A woman came by with a big, expensive bunch of flowers for their arrival. A very middle-class move. I thought she was the florist and didn't invite her in. She told me she was the friend who'd called me that time. She went off in a bit of a huff. I suspected she was there to check if everything was in order for their arrival. Ugh, these people. They weren't normal. Or maybe I wasn't. Eventually they arrived, and as expected, they were more interested in the dogs than me. I decided to take my leave as soon as possible. I'd cleaned the place, and it was certainly in order. I wasn't game not to leave it spick and span. A really weird thing happened as I was saying my goodbyes. I pretended to be sad to leave the dogs, reflecting their schmaltzy ways around the dogs. Real tears sprang into my eyes, and I was worried I'd end up in a full-on sob. What the fuck was wrong with me? I took off out the door, hoping Barbara wouldn't see it. So that was house sitting gig number 2. I seemed to be leaving in a worse state than when I arrived. Perhaps this ego death involved a period of uncontrollable depression and emotion, since it was a death after all. Ride through it and enlightenment might be mine. Barbara texted me the next day saying I'd left a hoodie there in my self-portrait sculpture, as she called it. I said I didn't need it. Recycle the clay, and that I'd pick up the hoodie on my way up north next time. I had no intention of getting that hoodie back. I could always buy more hoodies.